There is a specific kind of tiredness that only a familiar show can meet. You have seen these episodes before, some of them many times, and so the mind is free to let go of them. The voices arrive without asking anything of you. Finn and Jake move through the land of Ooh the way they always have, and because you already know where they are going, you do not need to follow. Adventure Time is unusually suited to this. The episodes run about 11 minutes each, small and complete, and they were made to sit 2 at a time inside a half hour. So the rhythm is gentle by design, a soft rise and a soft close, again and again, while you drift somewhere just underneath the surface of the sound. Half awake, you catch a line of dialogue, a familiar melody, the particular grain of a character speaking, and then you are gone again, and the show does not mind. Tonight is about the episodes at the edges of that memory. Across 10 seasons and more than 8 years of a show that ran from 2010 to 2018, there are quiet ones that the fans rarely name, the stories that live between the famous ones and are all the better for it. Those are the ones we stay with. Welcome to Marcy. This is a place for the long, slow hours, for the nights when sleep comes sideways and needs something familiar to hold on to. There is nothing here you have to keep up with. Settle into whatever holds you, let the light go low, and let the voices come to you the way they used to, from the next room, from the edge of a memory. Close your eyes if they are not already closing. We are going to spend a long, unhurried, while in Ooh, in the corners of it that most people walk past, and there is no need to remember any of it in the morning. Begin with a number, because the number is the whole problem. 283. That is how many episodes make up the main run of Adventure Time, spread across 10 seasons, from the 5th of April in 2010 to the 3rd of September in 2018. Say it slowly, and it still does not quite land, because a number that size resists being felt. You can hold 3 seasons of a show in your head. You can hold a favorite dozen episodes, the ones you return to. But a figure that size is not something you experience. It is a figure you file away. And that gap, between what a person can actually carry and what actually exists, is where this whole video lives. Consider how unevenly that total was distributed. The first 4 seasons ran 26 episodes each, a tidy, familiar shape. Then season 5 arrived and broke it, with 52 episodes in a single stretch, more than double what came before, an entire show's worth of material folded into one production year. Season 6 followed with 43. After that, the seasons contract, and contract sharply, until season 9 holds only 14 episodes and season 10 holds 16. So the run is not a steady river. It is a flood in the middle and a narrowing at both ends, and most of the water passed through in that swollen central span that almost nobody discusses episode by episode. There is more that the number does not even include. That figure actually does include the bonus special from 2018, a Minecraft-themed episode called Diamonds and Lemons, which counts as episode 279 of the overall run, even though it was produced apart from the main season 10 lineup and treated as something of an outlier. It does not count the micro-episode collections either, the small experiments that lived at the edges of the main show. There was The Wand in 2012. There was the 4-part Graybles All Sorts in 2015. There was the 5-part Frog Seasons in 2016. None of these fold into the main total, which means the true amount of Adventure Time, the total quantity of the thing, is even larger and even harder to survey than the already daunting headline figure suggests. Now think about the length of a single unit. A standard episode of Adventure Time runs about 11 minutes. That is the atom the whole series is built from, and it is a strange, small atom. 11 minutes is barely enough to introduce a situation and resolve it. It is why the episodes were broadcast in back-to-back pairs, 2 of them stitched together to fill a half-hour slot on the schedule, which means that from the very beginning, the series was designed to be consumed in a slightly disposable way, 2 little stories at a time, one flowing into the next, easy to half remember and easy to lose track of. The format itself encouraged forgetting. You did not sit down to watch an episode of Adventure Time the way you sit down to watch an hour of prestige drama. You let it run. Set the show against its own network and the scale becomes clearer still. With that many episodes, Adventure Time holds the second highest episode count of any Cartoon Network series, behind only the Ben 10 franchise and its 390. So this is not a mid-size show that happens to have a devoted following. By the raw measure of how much of it exists, it is one of the two largest things the network ever made. And yet here is a quiet contradiction worth sitting with. Despite running for 8 years, Adventure Time was not even close to Cartoon Network's longest-running series, with shows like Ed, Ed and Eddie, the Powerpuff Girls franchise, and Teen Titans Go, all managing longer stretches on the air. Ed, Ed and Eddie ran 10 years. The Powerpuff Girls franchise, across its original run and its reboot, added up to about 10 years. The Ben 10 franchise ran 13. Adventure Time trails all three in longevity while outpacing nearly all of them in sheer volume, which tells you something specific about how it was made. It did not stretch a modest amount of content across a long life. It packed an enormous amount of content into a shorter one. The episodes came fast, in dense clusters, faster than the years alone would ever suggest. That density is the reason so much of the show goes undiscussed. When people talk about Adventure Time, and there is a great deal of talk, they tend to circle the same landmarks. The channel you are listening to has itself walked several of those familiar paths already. There is a video about the Adventure Time iceberg, arranging its secrets by depth. There are 2 hours of obscure lore assembled into one long, quiet stream. There is a study of the philosophy of Jake, the dog who somehow became the series' accidental sage. There is a full history of the land of Oo, tracing the world from its beginnings to its end. Each of those took a vertical slice through the series, following a single thread down into the deep. The iceberg follows mystery. The lore video follows continuity. The philosophy video follows one character's inner life. The history video follows the timeline. Every one of them, by design, chases the parts of the series that connect to something larger. This is a different kind of map, one that leaves the deep lore, the grand history, and the hidden meanings to the videos that already chase them. This is a map of the episodes that fall between the landmarks, the buried ones, the skipped ones, the 11-minute stories that no one made a favorite, that anchored no theory and drew no retrospective of their own, because there were simply too many of them and not enough attention to go around. If the other videos followed the threads that tie the series together, this one lingers in the wide, flat spaces where no threads run at all. And those spaces are vast. Because of how the show was structured, Adventure Time mixed two very different modes. There were the dedicated multi-episode mythology miniseries, the concentrated arcs where the series turned serious and serialized, like Islands in Season 8 and Elements in Season 9, stretches built to be watched in order and to reward memory. But surrounding those arcs were long expanses of standalone, self-contained episodes, one-offs that begin and end in the same 11 minutes, and connect to nothing beyond themselves. Large portions of the run are exactly this, stories that do not advance the core mythology or resolve a mystery, that deepen the central relationships in no way a lore video would care to record. They exist, they entertain for 11 minutes, and then they release you. When people write the history of a show, these are precisely the episodes that vanish, because a history needs events that lead somewhere, and a one-off, by definition, does not. Some of these episodes do not merely get forgotten. Some of them get actively singled out as the series' weak points, and that too is part of this map. There is a user-curated list hosted on IMDb titled, plainly, The Worst Adventure Time Episodes, and it runs to 23 titles. Think about what that list represents. It is a small crowd of viewers agreeing that these particular episodes are the ones to skip, the ones that do not reward a rewatch, the low points of a show many of them clearly otherwise love. Screen Rant took a similar swing with an article whose title concedes the affection and then narrows the knife. It calls Adventure Time a near-perfect show, and then names 10 episodes it describes as hard to defend, a specific set that critics tend to return to whenever they discuss where the show faltered. One of those episodes comes up again and again, from fans and critics alike, and it makes a useful example because everyone seems to remember it for the same reason. Called Slow Love, it is a Season 2 episode built around a lovelorn snail. The complaints are consistent. The episode leans into gross-out humor, and it does so in a way that many viewers found deeply unpleasant rather than charming, which is why it surfaces so reliably on the lists of the series' most disliked half-hours. The shape of that reaction says something. A show that size will inevitably produce a few that a large number of people simply do not want to sit through again, and Slow Love became one of the names that gets attached to that feeling. Not the worst thing ever made, just an episode that a lot of people simply agreed to leave behind. There is even, remarkably, an official kind of permission to leave episodes behind. Screen Rant published a separate piece, a lore episode guide, whose entire purpose is to tell viewers which episodes they can skip without losing track of the overarching plot. Read that sentence again and notice how unusual it is. A show that generated enough material to warrant a formal guide on what you are allowed to ignore. Among the skippable episodes it lists are the one-offs, the Fiona and Cake specials that step sideways into a parallel version of the world, and the recurring Graybles chapters, those small anthology-style interludes that stand apart from the main story. The guide is not an insult to those episodes. It is an acknowledgement of scale. When a show is this large, watching all of it becomes a choice rather than an assumption, and someone, somewhere, will always be ready to hand you the shorter path. But the shorter path is not the path this video takes. The skip guide exists to help you avoid these episodes. We are going to do the opposite. We are going to walk back into them, on purpose, and pay attention to the ones the retrospectives left out and the guides told you to pass over, because there is a particular kind of interest in the discarded. The episodes that connect to the great arcs get analyzed endlessly, but the standalone 11-minute stories, the odd experiments, the ones a snail ruined for some people and a scheduling accident buried for others, those carry a different and quieter texture. They show you what the show was like when it was not trying to be important, when it was just filling another half-hour slot, 2 episodes at a time, one of hundreds, produced in a flood too large for any single fan to hold in their memory all at once. So that is the shape of what is coming, not the iceberg and not the timeline. A slow tour through the parts of Adventure Time that the fandom, the critics, and the retrospectives agreed to walk past. The buried episodes, the skipped ones, the 11-minute stories lost in a run so enormous that even the people who love it most have never truly seen all of it. There is a great deal to look at down here in the undiscussed middle, and no reason at all to hurry through it. There is a trick the mind plays when a show has been on the air long enough. Titles begin to sound like promises. You hear the name of an episode and you assume you already know its shape. So when a listener scanning the Season 5 roster of Adventure Time comes across an episode called simply Jake the Dog, the assumption arrives almost before the thought does. A character's name for a title, sitting there plainly, reads like a compilation. It reads like the kind of episode that gathers old moments and stitches them together. A highlight reel, dressed as a story. The sort of thing a long-running series produces when it needs to rest. And so this is the episode that gets skipped. Not because of what it is, but because of what its name suggests it is. The name is misleading, and the misunderstanding is worth sitting with. Jake the Dog is the 2nd episode of Season 5, the 106th episode of the series overall. It aired on Cartoon Network on the 12th of November, 2012, as the back half of the Season 5 premiere, following directly from an episode called Finn the Human. 2 names, 2 characters, 2 halves of a single evening of television. Placed side by side like that, they look even more like a retrospective, as though the series had paused to take stock of its 2 leads before moving forward. The instinct to skip becomes stronger. Why watch a clip show of a series you are already watching? Except it is not a clip show. That is the quiet fact at the center of this chapter, and it deserves to be said slowly. The plot of Jake the Dog follows Jake inside Prismo's time room, watching an alternate reality called Farm World come apart, and then spending his own wish to reverse the unraveling and save Finn. It is an original story, entirely self-contained. As far as fans have pieced together, the episode leans on freshly drawn animation rather than clips pulled from earlier installments. What looks from the outside like a backward glance is in fact one of the more forward-moving pieces of storytelling the series had attempted, a story about consequence and sacrifice built entirely from new animation and new ideas. The title tells you to expect the past. The episode gives you something that has never happened before. Consider who made it, because the care is visible in the credits. Jake the Dog was written and storyboarded by Cole Sanchez and Rebecca Sugar, with story development handled by Patrick McHale, Kent Osborne, and Pendleton Ward. These are not the names you attach to filler. This was the premiere of a season, the moment a show declares what it intends to be for the coming year, and the people steering it treated it accordingly. When the reviewer Oliver Sava wrote about the premiere for the AV Club, he gave the paired episodes a grade of A-, and described the result as dense, an episode that manages to evoke nearly every aspect of the series at once. Think about what that praise actually means. A dense episode is the opposite of a clip show. A clip show thins the material out. This one packed it in. The audience was there for it too. The premiere drew 3.435 million viewers and earned a 0.7 Nielsen rating among adults between 18 and 49. Those are the numbers of an event, not of a night the show was coasting. People tuned in expecting something, and by most accounts they received it. And yet, years later, in the long lists and the rewatch guides and the half-remembered rankings that fans keep in their heads, Jake the dog still carries the faint stigma of the skippable. The name did that. The name has outlived the reception. Here is where the misunderstanding gets genuinely strange, because Adventure Time does have real clip show episodes, and they are not these. They are the Graybles shorts. Episodes like 5 Short Graybles, the second episode of Season 4, and another 5 Short Graybles, the 24th episode of Season 5, and later, Graybles 1000+, the 35th episode of Season 6. Those are the genuine compilations, the episodes built out of small assembled pieces, gathered under a framing device and presented as a set. If a viewer wanted to point at the format that a series turns to when it wants a lighter structural week, the Graybles episodes are the honest answer. They are unrelated to Jake the dog in every way except the one that matters to the tired eye scanning a list, which is that none of them announce themselves clearly. And that is the small tragedy of format, the thing this chapter keeps circling back toward. The most skipped kind of episode is not defined by its content, but by its signal. The Graybles episodes are the ones that actually wear the clip show shape, and yet they hide it behind an invented word that means nothing to a newcomer. Jake the dog wears a name that screams compilation while containing none of it. The label and the thing have come loose from each other. A listener drifting through the catalog late at night, deciding what to watch and what to pass over, is navigating by titles, and the titles are lying to them in both directions. There is something restful in knowing this, in the way that correcting a small persistent error can be restful. You do not have to skip Jake the dog. Your instinct was wrong about it. This is a season premiere that critics called dense, and that millions watched, made by the writers Adventure Time trusted most, telling a story that exists nowhere else in the series. The clip shows are elsewhere, quietly doing their gentler work under a stranger name, and the whole knot of it, the skipping and the assuming and the misreading of a plain title, comes down to the oldest problem in any long story, which is that a name is not the same thing as the thing it names, and a series that runs long enough will teach you that lesson whether you want the lesson or not. There is a kind of Adventure Time episode that resists the very thing a viewer usually wants from television, which is a single story to follow from beginning to end. It arrives instead as 5 small pieces, 5 micro-stories loosely tied together, hosted by a figure who does not belong to the land of Ooh at all. His name is Cuber, and he is voiced by the comedian Emo Phillips, whose flat, unhurried delivery gives the character a strange gentleness. Cuber does not act in the stories. He presents them. He treats them as artifacts, as things called Graybles, and he invites you to guess what secret thread connects them. 4 times across the series run this format returns, and each time it asks the audience to do the work of a critic rather than the work of a fan, to look for the pattern instead of simply enjoying the plot. The first of these arrived early in the 4th season. 5 Short Graybles was the 2nd episode of that season and the 80th episode overall, and it first aired in April of 2012. Its credits read like a small committee. The teleplay came from Tom Herpich, Skylar Page, and Cole Sanchez, working from a story by Pendleton Ward, Patrick McHale, and Kent Osborne, and the direction was shared by Larry Leichlitter, Nate Cash, and Nick Jennings. That many hands on one episode is itself a clue to what an anthology episode is, which is several small visions arranged side by side, rather than a single one extended. Cuber is the frame that makes them feel like one object. In that first episode, Cuber frames the 5 vignettes as a guessing game. He is withholding the theme on purpose. You watch BMO looking into a mirror. You watch Finn and Jake high-fiving. You watch Princess Bubblegum building an enormous sandwich, and Ice King contending, with some dismay, with his own body odor, and a group of candy girls performing a song at a talent show. Only at the end does Cuber reveal that the theme was the five senses. Bimo at the mirror was sight, the high five was touch, the giant sandwich was taste, Ice King and his smell were, of course, smell, and the Candy Girls singing were hearing. Once you know it, you cannot unknow it, and the whole episode reorganizes itself in your memory into a neat little diagram of the human sensorium. That is the pleasure the format offers. Confusion, and then the small click of understanding. Now consider what the writers did with the second installment, because this is where the anthology stops being a simple puzzle and starts to play with your trust. 5 More Short Graybles was the third of season 5, the 107th overall, and it aired in November of 2012. Written this time by Tom Herpich and Steve Wolfhard. Kuber does his usual thing. He tells you the theme. He states plainly that the theme is the 5 tastes, the 5 flavors. And so you settle in expecting sweet, sour, salt, bitter, and that 5th savory taste, and you begin, dutifully, to map each segment onto a flavor. But something does not fit. The segments do not actually seem to be about taste at all. Watch them again, with a different question in mind. Finn and Jake do something with their thumbs. Marceline is moved, physically moved, by the pointer finger of a giant. Tree Trunks reacts to a statue, whose raised middle finger carries all the rudeness that gesture carries in our own world. Ice King places a ring on his ring finger, and Bimo's alter ego, taking tea, raises a pinky finger in that small performance of refinement. The true theme is not the 5 tastes, it is the 5 fingers of the hand. Kuber told you the wrong answer, and he told it to you with complete confidence, and the episode lets you sit inside that misdirection for its entire length. That is a bolder trick than the first episode ever attempted. The first Graybles asked you to find a hidden theme. The second gave you a false one and dared you to notice. Think about what that means for a show aimed, at least on paper, at children. It is teaching a kind of literacy. It is teaching you not to take the narrator's summary as the truth of the text, to watch the images themselves and let them contradict the words laid over them. There is a quiet audacity in building an 11-minute cartoon around the gap between what you are told and what you are shown. My own view, for whatever it is worth, is that 5 More Short Graybles is the most purely formalist thing Adventure Time ever made, and that its lower reputation is a little unfair. As indexed on IMDb, its user rating sits around 7.2, the lowest of the 4, while the first Graybles episode rests near 7.7. The audience, I suspect, felt tricked rather than delighted, and rated the feeling of being tricked. But the trick is the whole point, and it repays a second viewing more than most episodes of anything. The third installment moved from the body to the mind. Another 5 More Short Graybles was the 24th of season 5, the 128th overall, and it aired in June of 2013. Its hidden theme is heavier than senses or fingers. It is the 5 stages of grief. The segments carry it obliquely, as the format demands. Finn and Jake entertain Jake Jr. Princess Bubblegum helps Cinnamon Bun overcome a fear of the dark. Ice King and his penguins go about the small ordeal of choosing a movie. The 2 Lemon Grabs, Lemon Grab and Lemon Grab II, fight over a toy lemon doll, and in the strangest of them, Mr. Fox's subconscious draws a treasure map. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, the famous ladder of mourning, hidden inside a penguin's indecision and a fight over a doll. The anthology had by now become a machine for smuggling adult frameworks into children's comedy and trusting the viewer to feel the shape of a thing before naming it. That episode carries a rating close to 7.4, sitting between the 2 that came before it. The 4th and final Kuber episode changed everything by turning the camera on Kuber himself. Graybles 1000 Plus aired in Season 6 in May of 2015, and it is the highest rated of the 4 by a clear margin, near 8.2 on IMDb. For 3 episodes, Kuber had been a voice and a frame, a presenter with no story of his own. This episode gives him one, and it is a wild one. It reveals that Kuber actually lives 1,000 years after the era of Finn and Jake. He is on the run from aliens he has angered, and the reason he angered them is that he interrupted a space wedding and, in the chaos, accidentally killed the bride. He consults his archive of Graybles not for entertainment, but for guidance, searching those old recordings for anything that might help him survive. Sit with what that revelation does to everything you have already watched. Across 3 episodes, the recurring conceit was that the Graybles depicted tales from the days of old. It sounded like a storyteller's flourish, a fairy tale opening, the once upon a time of the land of Ooh. But Graybles 1000 plus recontextualizes that phrase completely. When Kuber calls these the days of old, he means it literally. He is a far future alien, looking back at Finn and Jake's present as ancient history, the way we might study a civilization 1,000 years gone. The high five, the giant sandwich, the fight over a lemon doll, all of it is, to Kuber, archaeology. The comfortable little guessing games were footage of a lost world, watched by a fugitive for clues to staying alive. This is the sort of long-delayed payoff that Adventure Time built its reputation on, and the anthology format made it possible. Because Kuber stood outside the stories, framing them, he could carry a secret across years of the series without ever intruding on the plots he introduced. The frame device was not just a way to bundle 5 unrelated shorts together. It was a slow-burning mystery in its own right, and the writers held the answer for 4 seasons. When it finally comes, it does not feel like a gimmick, but like a door opening onto a much larger and lonelier universe, one where the warmth of Finn and Jake's adventures is something a frightened alien clings to for comfort 1,000 years later. Consider the 4 episodes as a single argument about how stories carry meaning. The first says, a collection of unrelated moments can share a hidden theme, and finding it is a pleasure. The second says, the person telling you the theme might be wrong or lying, and you must watch for yourself. The third says the theme can be something as serious as grief, worn lightly, felt before it is understood. And the fourth says the storyteller has his own story, his own reasons for showing you these things, and those reasons may be desperate. 4 short cartoons, 5 little pieces each, and together they teach a whole way of watching. There is a reason so many fans have never sat through all 4 of these in full. They are scattered across 3 seasons, they do not advance the main story of Finn and Jake in any obvious way, and their episode titles are almost designed to blur together in the memory. 5, 5 more, another 5 more, and then a leap to 1,000. They are easy to skip and easy to forget, but taken together they form one of the boldest experiments the series attempted. A recurring exercise in making the audience assemble meaning from fragments, and then pulling the ground out from under the one figure they trusted to guide them. Kuber, in his flat and patient voice, was never quite the harmless host he seemed. He was a survivor, sorting through the wreckage of a world long dead, and he was letting you watch over his shoulder the whole time. There is a memory that can feel more solid than the thing it claims to remember. You are certain you saw an episode. You can describe the shape of it. Princess Bubblegum, in her lab, building a creature out of candy, a golem she names Justin, a small companion who exists for one story and then is never spoken of again. The character feels real because the show has done this exact move so many times. And yet, when you go looking for him, when you open the episode lists and the transcripts and the pages that catalog every named background figure in the land of Ooh, Justin the Candy Golem is not there. He was never there. No episode ever made him. And because nothing created him, there was nothing to abandon and no missing return to notice. The forgotten character is, in the most complete sense, forgotten, because he was never remembered into existence in the first place. This is worth sitting with, because it is the cleanest example of how the Adventure Time fandom generates its own apocrypha. Adventure Time is so dense with one-off inventions, with beings summoned for a single half episode and dropped, that the mind fills the gaps with plausible ghosts. A candy golem made by bubblegum is not an outlandish thing to imagine. It is almost too easy, and so the imagination supplies it, and hands it a name, and the name sticks. There is a Justin in Adventure Time. Just one. His name is Justin Rock Candy, and he is not a golem, and bubblegum did not make him. He is a candy person, which is a different category entirely, and he appears in exactly one place. In the 3rd season, in an episode called The Diary, he surfaces in a flashback, and only in a flashback. He is the high school crush of Nurse Betsy Poundcake, a memory inside a memory, glimpsed through the pages of a diary she once kept. Think about how thin that presence is. He does not act in the present of any story. He is not a character who does things while the camera watches. He is a recollection belonging to a minor figure, and what the recollection reveals is not flattering to him. Betsy's diary tells us that Justin Rock Candy cheated on her, and that he did it with her friends, Taffy and Mochi. That is the whole of him. A name, a betrayal, 2 other names, and a page in an old book. He exists to give a nurse a small private history, a wound she carried into adulthood, and then he closes with the diary. So the fandom's imagined Golem and the series' actual Justin share nothing but a name. One is a soil and crystal creation who never existed. The other is a candy boy who broke someone's heart in a single frame of the past. The distance between them tells you something about how the show is remembered, which is loosely, warmly, and often wrongly. The confusion runs deeper when you follow the trail people usually follow to find the Golem. They point to an episode they call You Made Me, and they say, surely that is where Bubblegum builds him. There is an episode with that exact title. It is the 20th episode of the 4th season, and it first aired in the late summer of 2012. But it has no Golem in it at all. Its actual story is one of the more melancholy things the series ever attempted. Princess Bubblegum, confronting the loneliness of the Earl of Lemongrab, decides to cure it by making him a companion, and the way she makes that companion is by cloning him. The clone is called Lemongrab II, and he becomes the Earl's companion, another version of the same sour, isolated being, made specifically so that isolation would end. That is a creation story, yes, but it is a creation of a copy, not a Golem, and it is aimed at loneliness rather than at labor or protection. Tom Herpich and Jesse Moynihan wrote and storyboarded it, from a story credited to Pendleton Ward, Patrick McHale, and Kent Osborne. It is a real thing, carefully made by named people, and it is not the thing the false memory reaches for. The title You Made Me is doing a lot of work in that misremembering. It sounds like it should announce a Golem. It announces a clone instead, and a lonely one. Then there is the matter of the transcript itself, the supposed scene source that was meant to prove the Golem existed. When you actually read it, it belongs to a completely different episode. It comes from Bimo Noir, the 4th season's 17th episode, an installment styled after black and white detective films. In it, the little living game console Bimo plays the part of a hard-boiled investigator, and the case is the theft of one of Finn's socks. There is no Golem in that room. There is no Bubblegum standing over a workbench bringing candy to life. There is a missing sock and a small machine narrating like a private eye. The document that was supposed to anchor the Golem story anchors nothing of the kind. It is a piece of a noir parody that wandered into the wrong file. And if you insist that Adventure Time does have a Golem, that part is true, but it belongs to no one named Justin and to no candy princess. In the episode called The Limit, there is a Golem made of soil and crystal, a guardian whose entire purpose is to crush trespassers. He is a real creature in a real episode. He simply has nothing to do with Princess Bubblegum, nothing to do with the name Justin, and nothing to do with any abandoned candy companion. He is a separate invention doing separate work, and the only reason he enters this story at all is that the memory of him may be part of what fused, in someone's mind, into a candy Golem that never was. What you are left with, then, is a chapter about a character who does not exist, and it is one of the more honest things this series can offer at a late hour. The show trained its audience to expect exactly this figure, a being conjured for one purpose, given a moment, then shelved and never referenced again. The pattern is so consistent that the audience began producing the pattern on its own, complete with a name. Justin the Candy Golem is what happens when a fandom internalizes a habit so thoroughly that it can hallucinate a perfect example of it. He is the follow-up that never came, to the introduction that never happened, and the fact that so many people are sure they remember him is the truest thing about him. Some Adventure Time episodes arrive without fanfare and leave without demanding much attention, and Hugwolf is one of them. It is the 8th episode of Season 4, the 86th episode overall, which first aired in the middle of May, in the year 2012. It does not appear often in the conversations people have about the best of Adventure Time. No fan theories orbit it, and nobody has built an iceberg diagram entry or a long essay around its emotional weight. And yet, if you sit with it, the episode carries a moral shape that is almost too clean, a fable about pressure and conformity, dressed up in the fur of a werewolf story. That combination, the smallness of its reputation and the clarity of its argument, is what makes it worth slowing down for tonight. Consider first how it was made, because the credits tell you something about how the show worked in this stretch of its life. The story is credited to Kent Osborne, Patrick McHale, and Pendleton Ward, the creator himself among them, while the writing and the storyboards were handled by Somvile Xiaphone and Bert Yoon. Larry Leaklitter served as the supervising director, with Adam Muto and Nick Jennings shaping the look and the direction alongside him. This is the assembly line of a show at the height of its confidence. A small room of people trading a premise back and forth until it becomes something strange and specific. The premise here is a hugging werewolf. It is exactly as silly as it sounds, and the people who built it clearly knew that, and they built it anyway, with care. The episode opens on an ordinary heroic errand. Finn and Jake set out to slay something called the Tree of Blight, the sort of quest the series hands them by the dozen, a monster to be dealt with, a landscape to be cleared. But the errand goes sideways almost immediately. An alpha hug wolf ambushes Finn, and rather than biting him or clawing him, or doing any of the things a predator in a folktale is supposed to do, it forcibly hugs him. Then it flees, driven off when Jake sets the Tree of Blight on fire. Hold on to that detail of the burning tree, because the episode will return to it in a way you will not see coming. For now it is just an escape, a monster scattered by flame, a hero left standing in a field having been hugged against his will. What happens next is the quiet engine of the whole thing. Finn develops a fever. He begins compulsively hugging BMO over and over, unable to stop himself. And Jake reads this the way a friend would read any sudden change in someone he loves. Jake assumes Finn is sick. He does not see a transformation. He sees an illness, and the distinction matters more than it first appears. Notice what this means for a moment. Something has entered Finn and begun to rewrite his behavior, and the person closest to him interprets the early signs as an ordinary ailment, something to be nursed rather than feared. The horror of the situation is hidden inside the ordinariness of the response. That gap between what is actually happening and what the people around Finn believe is happening is where the episode lives. They do what characters in this show reliably do when the world stops making sense. They go to a book. Jake and Finn research the condition in a library, and the book lays out the rules of the curse with the flat authority these fictional volumes always carry. An alpha hug wolf, it explains, creates new hug wolves by hugging a victim under a full moon. There is no known cure. Notice the economy of that. The mechanism of infection is contact, an embrace, the most gentle gesture a body can offer another body. And the condition it spreads is presented as permanent. A hug becomes the vector. Affection becomes contagion. The book does not moralize about this, it simply states the biology of the curse, and the plainness of the statement is what gives it force. Here is where the episode's reputation and its most uncomfortable reading intersect. The AV Club critic Oliver Sava reviewed it and gave it a B+, and in doing so he named the thing the episode is built on. Sava described the premise, in effect, as a hug rape concept, and he argued that it functions as an analogy for a far more serious real-world subject. He praised the episode for mining that concept for humor without leaning on heavy world-building, for taking a genuinely dark idea and holding it at exactly the distance where it can be funny and troubling at once. This changes how the earlier scenes read. The forced hug in the field, the fever, the compulsion, the book that says the condition spreads through unwanted contact and cannot be undone. Underneath the cartoon logic there is a shape that is not childish at all. The show never states this directly. It lets the fur and the silliness carry a weight that a plainer story could not have carried without becoming unbearable. After Finn fully transforms, the episode moves into its most telling stretch. He goes on a hugging spree through the Candy Kingdom, and then, understanding what he has become, he locks himself in the dungeon to keep everyone else safe. This is the moral center of the character, rendered without speeches. Finn does not want to hurt anyone. Given a body that has been turned against his own intentions, his instinct is to remove himself, to contain the danger by containing himself. The peer pressure reading of the episode sharpens here. A hug wolf is, functionally, a creature that cannot stop itself from pressing its behavior onto others, that spreads its own condition by contact, that turns everyone it touches into a version of itself. Finn, still himself enough to reason, chooses a cell over the risk of turning the kingdom into more of what he has become. Conformity is the disease, and isolation is the only way he can think to resist passing it on. But the dungeon does not hold him, and the way it fails is the sharpest joke in the episode. Cinnamon Bun is left as the sole guard, and Finn simply convinces him to open the door in exchange for a hug. Think about the perfection of that. The guard exists to keep the Hug Wolf contained, and the Hug Wolf escapes by offering the one thing it is dangerous for offering. Cinnamon Bun is not malicious. He is soft, agreeable, easily moved, the least resistant character imaginable, and that softness is exactly the crack the curse needs. If the episode is about how pressure spreads, then Cinnamon Bun is the demonstration of how it spreads, through the path of least resistance, through the person who cannot quite say no, through kindness that has not thought about consequences. The containment fails, not because of force, but because of agreeableness. That is the whole argument of the episode, compressed into one exchange at a dungeon door. The curse breaks in a way that fits the strange internal logic the episode has been building. Finn, now a beta Hug Wolf, outhugs the alpha Hug Wolf. He gives more of the thing than the creature that started it all, and by doing so he reverts both of them to normal. The condition is not cured by violence, not by the book's promised impossibility being overturned by some hidden remedy. It is undone by escalation, by the beta overwhelming the alpha at the alpha's own game, and when the alpha reverts, the episode delivers its first genuine surprise. The alpha Hug Wolf is revealed to be a woman. The monster that began the whole chain, the source of the compulsion, is a person underneath, and the episode lets that revelation land without underlining it. There is something quietly humane in the choice. The thing that spread the curse was not a beast at all, but someone caught in the same condition, further along. And then the ending closes the loop in a way that rewards the detail I asked you to hold on to. The woman transforms into a new tree of blight, the very thing Finn and Jake set out to destroy at the opening of the episode. The tree that Jake burned in the field returns, reborn from the body of the creature that ambushed them. The story eats its own tail. The quest that began the episode has produced, by its end, exactly the monster it was meant to eliminate, and the cycle is ready to begin again. If you were reading the episode as a fable about conformity and the spread of behavior, this is the bleakest and most honest note it could end on. The curse does not truly end, it changes shape and waits. Something new will be blighted, someone new will be hugged in a field under a full moon, and the whole thing will turn over once more. It is a modest episode by the numbers. It holds a rating of a little over 7 out of 10 from users on IMDb. Respectable and unremarkable, the score of a thing people liked well enough and did not think about again. But the modesty is part of why it deserves a slower look. Hug Wolf takes a genuinely uncomfortable idea, wraps it in the gentlest possible imagery, and builds a small closed system that comments on pressure, on contagion, on the way the softest people become the openings that pressure needs. It does this in 11 minutes, without lecturing, and then it hands the curse forward to the next unlucky victim and lets the credits roll. Most best of lists pass it by. Tonight, in the quiet, remember that some of the series' clearest arguments were made in the episodes nobody talks about. There is an episode of Adventure Time that most people who love the show could not describe to you from memory. They could tell you about the Lich. They could recite the beats of a Marceline flashback or the shape of the Ice King's loneliness. But this one sits in a strange blind spot, watched once, filed away, rarely returned to. Its name is Butopia, and it is the 14th episode of the 3rd season, the 66th episode overall, and it first aired on the 7th of November, 2011. The reasons it slips out of the rewatch, out of the collective memory, are more interesting than the episode's modest reputation would suggest. Consider first who made it. Butopia's writing and storyboards came from Adam Muto and Rebecca Sugar, two names that carry considerable weight for anyone who tracks the series' authorship. Larry Licklider directed, as he directed so much of this era, and Cole Sanchez served as creative director. It carries the production code 1008-65, a small administrative detail that means little on its own, and it drew 1.92 million viewers in the United States on its first broadcast. Those are not the numbers of a forgotten episode. On paper, this was a well-attended, well-credentialed piece of television, and yet it is the one that vanishes. The episode returns to a character the series had introduced only one season earlier. Susan Strong had first appeared in the episode that bears her name, the 18th of the 2nd season, which aired in 2011. A towering, mostly silent figure who mimicked Finn and seemed to be some kind of half-human thing living in the dark. Butopia brings her back with a request. She comes to Finn and Jake and asks them to help her tribe, the humans, reclaim their underground home from creatures called the Lubglubs. It is a simple quest structure, a liberation story, the sort of thing the show could do in its sleep. The Lubglubs are later revealed to be possessed pool floats and toys, which is exactly the kind of deflating, funny, slightly melancholy reveal Adventure Time specialized in during these years. But look closely at the humans themselves, because this is where the episode is doing more than it lets on. They are depicted as a tribe of primitive, fish-like mutants. Ichthyoid is the precise word, living in a watery cave beneath the Candy Kingdom. And they wear animal-themed hats, exactly as Finn does. Think about what that visual rhyme is doing. Finn, the last human, or so the early series wants us to believe, has always worn that white hat with the little ears. Here is an entire population of creatures who dress the same way, huddled underground, mimicking a form of humanity they may only half understand. The hat becomes a kind of costume of belonging, a thing you put on to claim an identity that may or may not be truly yours. That question, whose identity is real and whose is performed, sits underneath the whole episode without ever being stated aloud. Butopia implies, but does not confirm on screen, that Susan Strong is secretly human rather than a human. The episode dangles it and then withholds it. You are meant to leave the episode uncertain. Is she one of them, a mutant who happens to be larger and stronger and more articulate? Or is she something else entirely, a human hiding inside the tribe, wearing their world like the humans wear their hats? The episode declines to answer. It simply lets the doubt exist. And this, I think, is the first and largest reason Butopia gets skipped. When you watch it in 2011, that withheld reveal has nowhere to land. The mystery is planted, and then nothing grows from it, not for a very long time. A retrospective look at the episode names this directly, observing that the Susan Strong plotline feels disconnected from the main narrative of Adventure Time at the time it aired, because the character simply was not revisited. She goes back into the dark, and the program moves on to other things, and the seed sits in the ground. How long does it sit? The mystery of Susan Strong's humanity, set up here in the third season, is not visually confirmed until the episode called Dark Purple, the 29th of the sixth season, which aired on the 19th of February, 2015. That is more than 3 years later. 3 years is an enormous distance in the life of a television show, and an even greater distance in the life of a viewer. Children who watched Butopia when it aired had grown measurably older by the time the answer came. In Dark Purple, Susan Strong removes her hat, and we see a cybernetic implant on the left side of her head, confirming at last that she is a human, specifically a human who has been augmented, a cyborg. The hat had been hiding the truth all along, the same hat the humans wear, the same hat Finn wears. What looked like a marker of belonging turns out to have been a lid over a secret. Sit with the strangeness of that structure for a moment. A show plants a question, and then keeps its own audience waiting 3.5 years for the payoff, across dozens and dozens of episodes, across whole shifts in the series' tone and ambition. By the time the answer arrives, most casual viewers have long since stopped connecting it to the quiet episode where it began. The reveal in Dark Purple lands as its own moment, freshly startling, and Butopia does not get the credit for having set the table. This is the fate of an episode that does careful setup work for a story the show would not tell for years. It becomes invisible in retrospect, precisely because it did its job too early. The full weight of Susan Strong's story took even longer to arrive. Her complete backstory, her real name, Kara, her designation as Seeker XJ77, and the revelation that she was trained by Dr. Gross on a human island to hunt down and stop other humans trying to escape. None of that was revealed until the Adventure Time Islands miniseries, which aired at the very end of January and the start of February in 2017. That is nearly 6 years after Butopia. 6 years. The quiet episode beneath the Candy Kingdom, with its fish mutants in animal hats and its pool float monsters, turns out to have been the first faint sounding of a story about captivity, about a woman engineered to police the freedom of her own kind, about the terrible irony of a human trained to hunt humans. None of that is present in Butopia, but the door that opens onto it is here, standing slightly ajar. easy to walk past. There is a gender and society reading folded into all of this that rewards a second look. Susan Strong is coded, from her very first appearance, as powerful, physically imposing, and hard to categorize. She leads a tribe. She is the one who comes to ask for help, not the one who waits to be rescued. And the central instability of her character, in Buteaupia, is the question of what she actually is, beneath the performance of tribal, primitive identity. The humans are drawn as lesser, as degraded copies of humanity, and Susan stands among them as something more, though the episode will not say what. When the answer finally comes, she is revealed to be not a natural creature at all, but a made thing, a human shaped by a doctor's hand into a tool. The tribe she led were imitators of humanity, and she, their leader, was humanity remade into something engineered and controlled. The hats, the mimicry, the hidden implant, all of it circles around a question about who gets to be counted as a person, and who is only allowed to perform the shape of one. None of that is legible in a single viewing in 2011. That is the honest truth of why Buteaupia falls out of rewatches. This is a good episode, competently made by strong hands, rated 7.6 out of 10 by users on one of the larger film databases, a respectable and unremarkable score. It is not a failure, but something harder to hold on to than a failure. This is a piece of quiet groundwork whose meaning is almost entirely retroactive, an episode that only becomes important once you know things it refuses to tell you. Watched forward, in order, it is a pleasant, slightly odd standalone about liberating a cave from haunted pool toys. Watched backward, with everything Adventure Time would eventually reveal, it becomes the first chapter of one of Adventure Time's saddest and most thoughtful character studies. That gap, between the forward experience and the backward one, is exactly the space a rewatch tends to skip over. You remember the episodes that hit hard on their own terms. You forget the ones that were patiently waiting to matter. Buteaupia was waiting for 3 years to have its central question answered, and for nearly 6 to have its full story told. And by then, the viewer's attention had moved 100 times. So it sits there, the 66th episode, 1.92 million people watching once, and then, without ceremony, moving on. An episode about a woman in a hat who was not what she appeared to be, in a show that would not admit what she was until almost everyone had stopped asking. There is an episode in the 3rd season that does not behave like the rest of the show around it. It is called Thank You, and it premiered on Cartoon Network in late November of 2011, near the tail of a year when Adventure Time was still teaching audiences how strange it was willing to be. On paper, it is one episode among many, carrying a plain production code and a place somewhere in the middle of the season. In practice, it is the moment the series stops talking, almost entirely, and asks whether it can still hold you without words. Most episodes of this show were built by 2 storyboard artists working as a pair, trading panels, checking each other, splitting the labor of turning a premise into moving pictures. Thank You was not made that way. Tom Herpich wrote it and storyboarded it alone. That single fact tells you something about the texture of what follows, because a solo hand tends to leave a more consistent fingerprint, a single sensibility running from the first frame to the last without a seam. The episode has the quiet coherence of something one person sat with for a long time, and it shows. The story it chooses is almost defiantly simple. A snow golem, a creature made of cold, comes across a firewolf pup that has been abandoned, and against every reason he might have, he decides to care for it. Think about what that arrangement actually is. Fire and snow are natural enemies. One unmakes the other by simply existing near it. The snow golem cannot hold this small, warm animal the way you would hold something you love, because holding it would begin to end him, and warming it is the last thing his own body is built to do. So the whole episode becomes a study of tenderness practiced across an impossible gap, a care that has to invent itself from scratch because the usual gestures are all forbidden. And it does this in near silence. The 2 central figures, the golem and the pup, do not speak to one another until the very end. Nothing narrates it. There is no commentary laid over the top to tell you how to feel, and the space where the jokes usually go is simply left open. Adventure Time, which in other weeks could not stop talking, which built entire episodes out of banter and wordplay, here decides to withhold almost all of it. That withholding is the point. When a character cannot explain himself, you are forced to read him, to watch what he does with his hands and his weight and his slow decisions, and the meaning arrives through action rather than through dialogue. The voices behind these mostly silent characters were chosen with unusual care. The Snow Golem is voiced by Pendleton Ward, the man who created the entire series, which is a telling choice. The person who dreamed the whole world lends his own voice to the figure at the center of its most restrained hour, a figure who barely gets to use that voice at all. The Firewolf pup and the other firewolves around it are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, an actor whose particular gift is making creatures that do not use language feel completely alive through breath and yips and small animal sounds. Between the two of them, you have a performance built almost entirely out of noises that are not words, which is exactly what an episode like this needs. While the golem and the pup move through their wordless story, the episode keeps a second thread running alongside them. Finn and Jake spend their part of the episode trying to break open the Ice King's suit of ice armor. It is a lighter, more familiar kind of business, the sort of physical problem the show solves every week, and its ordinariness is useful. It reminds you of the register the series usually operates in, the comic effort and the trading of lines, and by contrast, it makes the silence of the main story feel even more deliberate. You could almost read the two plots as the episode holding up its two hands, the everyday one and the strange one, and letting you feel the difference in weight. Where the main story goes is not a place a children's cartoon is obligated to go. The Snow Golem does not keep the pup. He carries it back to where it belongs, returning it to its family at their home, a place that is overrun with fire. Picture that arrival for a moment. A being of snow walking into a house made of the exact element that dissolves him, and doing it anyway, because it is the right ending for the small creature he has cared for. He gives the pup back, and in doing so, in that fire-filled place, the Snow Golem melts away. His care for the pup and his own undoing turn out to be the same motion. He completes the act of love, and the act of love completes him, in the older sense of finishing, of bringing to an end. That is the quiet devastation the episode is built toward, and the restraint is what lets it land. Because you have watched him without the cushion of dialogue, because you have had to read his patience and his decisions for yourself, his disappearance does not feel narrated to you. It feels witnessed. The title, offered at the very end, arrives less as a punchline than as the single word the whole thing has been withholding, the one thing that finally needs to be said out loud after everything that was not. It is easy, in a series with so many loud and quotable episodes, to let a nearly wordless one slip past. This is one of the least discussed half hours the show ever made, and part of the reason is simply that there is so little to quote from it. You cannot pass around its best line, because it barely has lines. Its power lives in mood and image and pacing, in the things that do not survive being summarized, and so it tends to get remembered as a feeling rather than as an event. That is the fate of atmospheric work. It moves people deeply and then resists their attempts to say why. The people who make and judge animation, though, did notice. Thank You screened at the Sundance Film Festival, which is not a place a typical episode of a Cartoon Network series turns up. A festival built around independent film made room for a single installment of a television cartoon, and that fact alone marks how far outside its own format this episode reached. It was also nominated for an Annie Award in the category for Best Animated Special Production, the industry recognizing that something unusual had been attempted and carried off. Those two honors, the festival screening and the nomination, are the outside world confirming what the episode itself insists, that it belongs to a different order of ambition than the week around it. What makes it worth returning to, in my own view, is the way it trusts its audience. It assumes you can sit with quiet, that you will do the work of reading a creature who cannot tell you what he feels, that a story about care given across an impossible difference, fire and snow, warmth and cold, does not need to be underlined to be understood. Herpich, working alone, built something that behaves more like a short film than an episode, and the series was secure enough in itself to let one of its own hours refuse almost everything that usually defines it. So when you think of Adventure Time, and you think of its speed and its noise and its endless invention of new words, hold this episode somewhere beside all of that. A being of snow finds a small thing made of fire, cares for it in silence, carries it home, and dissolves in the giving. There is very little said and a great deal meant. It is the kind of thing that plays gently in the background, and then, if you are half awake and listening, quietly takes the whole night out from under you. There are episodes fans learn to file away and rarely return to. It is the one that stops behaving like the series around it. The plot slows, the dialogue thins, and the music swells up to take the space where jokes and quests usually live. These episodes ask a listener to sit inside a feeling rather than follow an adventure, and for a certain kind of viewer, that is precisely the wrong thing to ask. The episode I want to think about tonight is one of these, and it is remembered, wrongly, for something it never actually did. The episode is called The Party's Over, Isla de Señorita. It is the 22nd episode of Season 5, and it debuted on the 27th of May in 2013. Kent Osborne and Cole Sanchez wrote and storyboarded it, two names that recur across the series' most subtly strange half-hours. And its premise is exactly the sort of thing that makes some fans reach for the next episode in the queue. Ice King moves onto a living, sentient island. The island turns out to be a woman, of a kind, and more than that, she turns out to be the former girlfriend of the party god. What follows is less a story than a mood, carried by two original songs, one called Gone with the Tide, and the other called Ice King and the Island Lady. Think about what that structure does to a viewer who came for adventure. The episode is largely sung, it breaks format and becomes, for its running time, a musical. There is no dungeon and no monster to defeat in the ordinary sense, and the episode never delivers a clean victory. There is a lonely man, a heartbroken island, and the slow understanding that some relationships are over before they begin. It is tender, and it is odd, and a great many people skip it. That is not a criticism of them. It is simply what happens when a show that has trained you to expect one thing hands you another. Now here is the strange part. The reason this episode belongs in a chapter about a specific goose. Somewhere in the collective memory of the fandom, Isla de Señorita became attached to a character it does not contain. Ask around, and you will sometimes hear that this is the episode that introduced Choose Goose, the rhyming merchant who trades in strange goods and stranger bargains. It is a tidy story, a format-breaking musical, a memorable side character, the two filed together in the mind, because both are unusual. But it is not true. Choose Goose does not appear in The Party's Over, Isla de Señorita. Go through the episode's full character list, read the transcript from the first line to the last, and he is simply not there. The island, the party god, Ice King, the songs. No Goose. This matters more than a small correction usually would, and I want to be honest about why. This entire project rests on the difference between what we remember and what actually happened. Memory is generous and memory is lazy. It groups things by feeling. An unusual episode and an unusual merchant drift toward each other over the years until they seem to have always shared a scene. The wrongness feels like knowledge. So when you hear, tonight or anywhere, that Choose Goose was introduced in the Singing Island episode, you are hearing a very natural mistake, and you can let it go. Because the truth is, both plainer and older. Choose Goose actually first appears much earlier, in a Season 2 episode called Blood Under the Skin, which aired back in 2010. That is where the character enters the world of Ooh. Not in a musical, not in Season 5, but years before, in a quieter corner of the series' early run. The merchant who feels like a late, strange invention was in fact there almost from the beginning, waiting to be remembered correctly. The voice belongs to Jeff Bennett, an actor credited with playing Choose Goose across a number of Adventure Time episodes. Bennett is one of those performers whose work you have almost certainly heard without ever learning his name, and the Goose is a good showcase for what he does. The character speaks largely in rhyme, which is a trap for an actor. Rhyme can turn a performance into a metronome, every line landing on the same predictable beat. Bennett instead plays the rhyming as a kind of salesmanship, a patter, the sound of someone who has learned that a couplet closes a deal faster than an honest sentence. The Goose is charming precisely because you can hear him deciding to be charming. To actually see Choose Goose do something that matters to a story, though, you have to travel forward again, past the Singing Island, to an episode where he is not the strangeness, but the solution. That episode is Blade of Grass, the 45th of Season 5, broadcast on the 20th of January in 2014, and it repays attention because it uses the Goose the way the series uses most of its recurring oddities, as a door that only opens once the heroes have earned it. The episode begins with a small, stubborn refusal. Finn has just come through a fight, and Jake, in the practical way of an older brother, tells him he should get a new sword. "These guys could have hurt you," Jake says. It is a reasonable thing to say. Finn's weapon is not equal to the danger he keeps walking into. But Finn will not hear it. "I love this sword," he says. And that is the whole of his argument. There is no logic in it, only attachment, and Adventure Time treats that attachment with a straight face. Finn's love for an object he already owns is going to shape everything that follows, though neither he nor we can see it yet. They go shopping anyway, and here Choose Goose makes his first quiet appearance in the episode, not as a character, but as a place they choose to avoid. Finn and Jake pass the Goose's shop while looking for a sword, and they decide to try a different merchant instead, one who is never named. Their reasoning is a grudge with a history. Choose Goose, they recall, once sold them defective armor, so they walk past his door on the strength of an old disappointment, carrying the memory of a bad deal into a search for a better one. It is a small moment, but notice how it plants the Goose in the story before he ever speaks. He is already the merchant they do not trust. The merchant they turn to instead is a mysterious figure who sells Finn a grass sword and calls it a bargain. And before the deal is done, the seller says the words that should always make a listener sit up. "No takebacks," he warns Finn plainly, in advance, that this transaction cannot be undone. Finn buys anyway. There is a whole philosophy folded into that exchange. The idea that the clearest warnings are the ones we are least equipped to hear when we want something. The sword is beautiful, and it is cheap, and it is his, and the phrase "no takebacks" slides right past him. The sword's nature reveals itself gradually, and the show is patient about it. The first sign is almost a gift. Someone throws a pizza at Finn's head, and before he can even react, the new sword deflects it on its own. Finn does nothing. The blade acts for him. Jake notices, and remarks that Finn is suddenly much better with a sword than he was before. It reads as a compliment. It is really the first symptom. The weapon is not making Finn skilled. The weapon is moving by itself and letting Finn take the credit. The second sign comes at Tree Trunks' house, in a moment that should be domestic and harmless. Finn slices an apple for her, and the cut is unnaturally perfect, a precision no hand achieves by wanting to. Watching this, Jake reaches the conclusion the episode has been steering toward. "That sword is cursed," he says, and the word is right. What looked like sudden talent, what looked like a bargain, is a curse operating through Finn's arm. The blessing and the curse are the same thing seen from two distances. Then the night comes, and the sword drops all pretense. It animates on its own and attacks Finn, turning against the very person who owns it. Finn cries out that the sword is after his flesh, and Jake has to physically restrain the weapon to keep it from its master. This is the moment the fantasy of the effortless upgrade collapses. The thing that fought his battles for him now wants to consume him. The precision that sliced the apple wants to slice him, and there is nowhere to return it, because he was told, plainly, no takebacks. Before the brothers set out to solve the curse, the episode gives the sword one more scene, and it is a strange and gentle one. Finn and Jake use the cursed weapon to fend off robbers who are stealing candles from an elderly shopkeeping couple. The couple, grateful, promise Finn a reward that is somehow both humble and grand. They will build a life-size candle statue of him to stand as their shop's mascot. Think about the shape of that image for a moment. A boy fighting with a weapon that wants his flesh, defending old people's candles, and being promised immortality in wax. The cursed thing does good in his hands, even as it plots against him. The episode keeps holding these two truths together, the danger and the usefulness, and refusing to let either one cancel the other. To break the curse, the brothers finally need the one merchant they spent the opening avoiding. They go to Choose Goose, and the Goose remembers the grudge as clearly as they do. He refuses to help them find the sword's seller, and he has a word for them: backstabbers. This is the payoff of that early moment when they passed his shop. The Goose is not a neutral information booth. He is someone they wronged, or someone who feels wronged, and he will not hand over what he knows to people who walked past his door. He only agrees to help after Finn apologizes for a past business dealing. The apology is the price. Not gold, not a quest, just Finn admitting that an old deal went badly and owning his part in the bad blood. Once the apology is made, the Goose becomes exactly what a merchant of secrets should be. He identifies the sword's seller as a wizard living atop grassy mountain, in the grassy plains, and he offers, as a parting gift, a piece of character assessment. He warns Finn and Jake that the wizard is a huge dingwad. It is a funny line, and it is also good information, and the two things are not separate. The Goose knows the terrain, and he knows the people in it, and he delivers both in the same breath. This is the whole value of a character like Choose Goose. He is the series' way of connecting its scattered locations, a living map who charges his toll in apologies and rhymes. The grassy wizard is, as promised, a dingwad. At his home he commands animated grass creatures to attack Finn, sending the very element of the curse against its bearer. And here the episode turns its own logic inside out. Finn cuts through all of the grass creatures using the cursed sword's power. The curse defends him from the curse's maker. The wizard's attack is defeated by the wizard's own gift. There is something almost inevitable about it, the sense that once a thing is truly part of you, it will protect you even from the person who forced it upon you. Finn asks the wizard to lift the curse, and the wizard refuses. He declares that the grass sword will be part of Finn for all eternity. This is the wall the episode has been building toward. No takebacks was the warning. For all eternity is the sentence. There is no undoing it. No merchant is clever enough, and no wizard is willing. The thing Finn bought is his forever, whether he consents or not. And this is where Blade of Grass does something quietly remarkable, and where a musical that skips the goose, and an adventure that needs him finally rhyme with each other in theme, if not in fact. Finn does not defeat the curse. He cannot, so he chooses to accept it instead. "I think I am cool with that," he says, and in the moment he stops fighting the sword, he gains conscious control of its grass powers. The struggle was the curse. The acceptance is the cure. The weapon that attacked him in the night, that wanted his flesh, becomes an extension of his will the instant he stops trying to give it back. Sit with what that resolution actually claims, because it is stranger and wiser than most children's television bothers to be. The lesson is not that Finn should have listened to Jake and bought a safer sword. The lesson is that some acquisitions cannot be returned, some choices bind you for good, and the only freedom left is in how you hold them. Finn loved his old sword for no reason anyone could argue with. He loses it, and gains a thing he did not understand, and is warned it can never be unbought, and finds that his power over it begins the moment he stops wishing it were otherwise. That is a heavy thought to hand a boy with a wax statue in his honor. The show hands it to him anyway, and lets a rhyming goose stand at the center of the map that leads there. So the two episodes sit at a distance from each other, the singing island in Season 5, and the grass sword also in Season 5, and the memory that binds them is a mistake. Choose Goose is not in the musical. He was never introduced there. He first surfaced years earlier, in Season 2, in Blood Under the Skin, voiced by Jeff Bennett, and his real work is the work he does in Blade of Grass, turning a grudge into an apology, and an apology into a direction. The format-breaking episode that fans skip truly earns its songs, and it deserves to be remembered accurately, without the goose folded in. Two unusual things, kept apart at last, each stranger and clearer for being seen on its own. A particular quiet surrounds the episodes a show makes near its end. By the time Adventure Time reached its 10th season, the enormous machinery of Marceline's backstory had already been built, examined, and put on display, and what remained was smaller, gentler, and much easier to overlook. Marcy and Hunson is the 7th episode of that 10th season, and it premiered on the 17th of December of 2017 on Cartoon Network. If you ask a devoted viewer to name the essential Marceline episodes, this is almost never one of the titles that arrives. It sits at the back of the shelf, behind the louder books. Tonight, consider why that is, and whether the neglect is deserved. The premise begins, oddly enough, not with Marceline at all, but with a sword. Peppermint Butler, the small and faintly sinister attendant of the Candy Kingdom, forges a weapon called the Nightblade for Finn, and to complete it he requires something that cannot be hammered out of ordinary metal. He needs Nightosphere magic, so he summons Hunson Abadir, the ruler of that dark dimension, to infuse the blade with its power. This is the mechanism that pulls Hunson into the world of the episode, and the smallness of it matters. The father of Marceline does not arrive because of some cosmic emergency. or a crisis of the bloodline. He arrives because a candy servant needed a favor for a sword. The engine of the story is domestic in scale, almost incidental, and that tone carries through everything that follows. Once Hunson is here, the episode discovers what it actually wants to be about. He learns that Marceline is performing a solo concert for ghosts at Hamburger Hills Cemetery, and rather than respecting the boundary of an event he was not invited to, he forces his way in. Consider what that reveals as a piece of characterization. This is a being of immense supernatural authority, a soul-devouring lord of another realm, and the shape his love takes is the shape of a father who cannot simply stay away when his daughter is performing somewhere nearby. He inserts himself. He crashes the show. There is something both funny and a little sad in that, the way a parent's affection can arrive as an intrusion, unable to distinguish between being present and being too present. What happens next is exactly the kind of chaos that follows Hunson wherever he goes. He gets into a brawl with the ghosts during Marceline's concert, and Finn has to intervene to break it up. Here again, the framing is telling. The disruption is not villainous. Hunson is not trying to hurt anyone or seize anything. He is simply incapable of attending an event without turning it into a disturbance, and the concert, which was meant to be Marceline's own quiet space, becomes a scene of a father misbehaving in front of his child's audience. The stakes are entirely emotional, entirely interpersonal. No one is in danger of losing their kingdom, or their memory, or their life. Someone is only in danger of being embarrassed by their dad. The episode ends in a place that tells you a great deal about the register it is working in. The group meets Princess Bubblegum at a restaurant, an ordinary, unremarkable setting, and there Marceline thanks her father for his support. That is the resolution. Not a battle won, not a secret uncovered, but a small act of gratitude spoken across a restaurant table. After centuries of the complicated history between these two, after all the ways Hunson has failed and intruded and been forgiven, the arc of this half hour bends toward something as modest as a daughter acknowledging that her father, in his clumsy way, showed up for her. The show trusts that this is enough. Whether it is enough for the audience is a different question, and it is close to the reason this episode fades from memory. Woven into all of this is the original song Slow Dance With You, written by the guest musician Babeo Baggins. Adventure Time had always used music as a way to reach the emotional interior of Marceline in particular, and a song is the kind of element that ought to lift an episode into the memorable tier. Yet even the song here feels calibrated for warmth rather than for revelation. It is a slow dance, an intimacy, not an anthem of pain or origin. The whole episode is built out of these gentle materials, and gentleness, curiously, is one of the things that makes a piece of television harder to remember. We tend to archive the wounds and forget the reconciliations. The people who made this episode were not minor figures, which makes its quietness more interesting rather than less. Marcy and Hunson was storyboarded by Graham Falk and by the showrunner himself, Adam Muto, working from a story credited to Muto, along with Jack Pendarvis, Kent Osborne, and Julia Pott. The supervising direction came from Cole Sanchez, and the art direction from Sandra Lee. This is a serious creative roster, the same kind of talent that shaped the series' more celebrated hours. And the voice of Hunson Abadir was provided, as a guest, by Martin Olson. There is a private resonance in that casting that the series had leaned on for years, and its presence here is a reminder that the series took this father seriously as a character, even when it was placing him in a lighter story. The craft was not diminished, only the ambition was scaled down on purpose. The numbers from that first broadcast sketch the outline of an audience that was, by this point, a devoted remnant rather than a broad crowd. The episode reportedly drew somewhere around 750,000 viewers, with a rating of about 0.2 of a point in the 18 to 49 demographic. These are the figures of a show in its long twilight, still watched, still loved, but no longer a centerpiece of the schedule. And the critical response matched that muted arrival. A review from the AV Club at the time reportedly described Marcy and Hunson as a cute episode, but also the slightest among the 4 episodes that aired that day. Weigh that verdict for a moment, because it is generous and dismissive at the same time. Cute is a compliment that closes a door. Slightest is a ranking that places an episode at the bottom of even a single afternoon's offerings. The episode was liked and, in the same breath, set aside. Now place this alongside the episodes that did become the pillars of Marceline's story, and the reason for the eclipse comes into focus. Consider Stakes, the 8-part miniseries that aired across 4 nights, from the 16th to the 19th of November in 2015. That event was dedicated entirely to revealing Marceline's vampire origin, and its first installment, Marceline the Vampire Queen, stands as the 6th episode of the 7th season. Stakes was a spectacle by design. It was given its own week, its own promotional weight, its own mythic architecture. It answered questions the audience had carried for years, and it wrapped those answers in horror imagery and transformation, and the drama of a hero remaking herself. When a show hands you 8 episodes of revelation across 4 nights, it is telling you, unmistakably, what to remember. And consider Simon and Marcy, the 14th episode of the 5th season, which premiered on the 25th of March in 2013. That single half hour reveals young Marceline's bond with Simon, the man who would become the Ice King, in the ruins of a post-apocalyptic world. It is among the saddest things the series ever produced, a story about a broken adult caring for a child while his own mind erodes. It gave viewers an emotional wound they would never quite recover from, and wounds, as we said, are what memory keeps. Between the operatic scale of Stakes and the aching intimacy of Simon and Marcy, the retrospectives write themselves. There is simply not much room left on the mantle for a cute episode about a father crashing a concert. Yet here is the argument for why the neglect is not entirely fair, and it rests on a fact that is easy to skip past. Hunson Abadir was not a new invention wheeled out in the 10th season for a filler story. He had appeared in Marceline-focused episodes for years, going back to It Came from the Nightosphere in the 2nd season, and Daddy's Little Monster in the 4th. The father-daughter dynamic was established long before Marcy and Hunson ever aired. Those earlier episodes were the difficult ones, the ones about betrayal, about a father who steals souls and abandons his daughter and turns her against her will into something monstrous. They set up a relationship defined by hurt, and that changes what the 10th season episode is actually doing, if you are willing to see it. Because Marcy and Hunson is not trying to compete with the origin stories. It is the epilogue to them, a picture of what a relationship looks like on the far side of all that damage, once the revelations are spent and the wounds have scarred over, and what remains is the ordinary, ongoing work of tolerating a parent you have decided to keep in your life. The reason it ends at a restaurant table with a simple thank you is that this is where these stories actually end, if they end well. Not in a final confrontation, but in a small dinner, in a daughter deciding that her impossible father's clumsy support is worth acknowledging out loud. The episode is slight precisely because reconciliation is undramatic. It has none of the machinery that makes a set piece, only the quieter truth that all that machinery was always building toward. This is the lens worth carrying away tonight. The retrospectives leave Marcy and Hunson out because retrospectives are built to reward spectacle and revelation, and this episode offers neither. It offers instead the thing that comes after both, the long calm that no highlight reel knows how to include, a concert crashed by a father who could not stay away, a brawl broken up by a friend, a song about a slow dance, a dinner where the fighting is finally over. Measured against the vampire miniseries and the post-apocalyptic tragedy, it will always look like the slightest of the 4, exactly as the critic said. But a story about a family does not only consist of its catastrophes. It also consists of the quiet Tuesday, years later, when everyone sits down together and the old wounds no longer need to be spoken of, and someone simply says thank you. That the show was willing to give one of its final Marceline episodes to that particular quiet is not a weakness. It is a choice, and a truthful one, and it is the reason this episode deserves a little more of our memory than it has been given. There is a way that a show can hide its largest idea inside its smallest gesture, and Adventure Time did this more than once, though rarely as softly as it does in the episode called Puhoi. This is Season 5, Episode 16, and on the surface, it is a story about a boy and a couch. Finn falls through a couch cushion, and the fall becomes a portal, and the portal opens onto a place named Pillow World. That premise sounds like the setup for a joke. For most of its length, the episode almost lets you believe that is all it is. What happens inside Pillow World is stranger and sadder than the frame suggests. Finn does not merely visit, he stays. He lives out an entire lifetime there, and the episode has the patience to let that lifetime accumulate. He grows old, he marries, he has children, and those children grow, and the years keep moving in the calm way years move when no one is stopping them. By the end of his time in that world, Finn is an old man, and then he dies of old age, having spent what feels, to him, like every day he was ever going to have. Consider the weight of that inside a program made, at least in part, for children. A full human life, from marriage to grandchildren to death, folded into the space of a single quarter hour, treated not as tragedy, but simply as what happened. And then the episode does the thing that concerns this chapter. Finn's spirit begins its journey back. It has to travel out of Pillow World and return to the boy who fell through the cushion, and along that return it passes through the open mouth of a giant creature, across its tongue, and the creature has 4 eyes. If you watched Puhoi when it first aired, you had no reason to hold on to that image. The image is brief and dreamlike, and it does not announce itself. Yet that 4-eyed thing is the first appearance in the entire series of the character who would eventually be identified as Golem, and Golem is the antagonist the whole show finally arrives at, years later, in its finale. Consider the strangeness of that placement for a moment. The show's ultimate cosmic threat, the entity the story spends its last hours confronting, is introduced not in a moment of danger, not with music or menace, but as scenery on the way out of a dream about pillows. It is glimpsed inside the return trip of a spirit that is not even supposed to remember any of this. That is the kind of seeding that only reveals itself in reverse, once you already know what you are looking for. On a first pass, it is nothing. On a second pass, after the ending exists, it becomes one of the earliest threads the series ever laid down toward that ending. The detail that makes Puhoi essential, rather than simply odd, is what happens to Finn's memory. When he comes back, he has forgotten the whole thing. The entire lifetime, the marriage, the children, the old age, the death, all of it slips away from him, the way a dream slips away from a person the moment they wake. He does not carry it. He cannot tell anyone. The experience was total, and then it was gone, leaving no trace he can point to. This is the chapter's real subject, the way a person's memories can be altered by an experience they are then denied the ability to hold. Finn passed within inches of the creature that would end the world he knows, and he was not permitted to keep the memory of having seen it. There is something almost merciful and almost cruel about that arrangement, and the show does not resolve which. To live a full life and then lose the memory of it is one of the heaviest ideas the series ever touches, and it is delivered without ceremony, tucked into an episode most viewers would not name if asked to list the important ones. That is precisely why it belongs in a discussion of overlooked setup. The famous episodes get remembered, the ones that do the quiet structural work, the ones that plant a face or an idea so early that no one recognizes it as planting, tend to be the ones fans walk past. Puhoi is a walked-past episode carrying one of its largest seeds. To understand how large, you have to look forward, past this episode, to the machinery it helped prepare. Much later, in Season 9, Adventure Time introduces a character named Fern. Fern arrives in the Season 9 premiere, the episode called 2 Swords. And Fern is a grass and vine duplicate of Finn, a version of Finn grown from other material, wearing his shape and carrying pieces of who he is. For a while, Fern is a companion and a complication rather than a threat. That changes in Season 9, Episode 14, an episode titled 3 Buckets, where Fern gains the ability to shapeshift. With that power, Fern stops being a copy who stands beside Finn and becomes a copy who can replace him. In 3 Buckets, Fern impersonates Finn and traps the real Finn, taking over his life, stepping into it as though it were an empty coat. Set that beside Puhoi for a moment. In Puhoi, Finn lives a whole life and is then robbed of the memory of it, a self erased from the inside. In 3 Buckets, a false Finn traps the true one and wears his life from the outside. Both episodes, seasons apart, are turning the same question over. What is a self when it can be lost, forgotten, duplicated, or stolen? What remains of Finn when the memory is gone, or when someone else is walking around being him? The show does not draw a line between these 2 episodes for you. It simply lets them rhyme, one early and half-hidden, one later and sharper, both circling the fragility of a single identity. And both of them point at the same distant place. Fern, the grass duplicate who took Finn's life, eventually becomes Golb's champion. The copy of Finn ends up serving the four-eyed creature that Finn's own spirit brushed past, unremembering, all the way back in Pillow World. Fern dies fighting Golb in the series finale, the episode called Come Along With Me, which is Season 10, Episode 13. That finale is the 280th episode of the whole run, and it is built as a four-part ending, the widest and most deliberate structure the series ever gave itself. So the creature glimpsed on a tongue in Season 5, and the duplicate born in Season 9, and the champion who dies in Season 10, are all part of one long shape, and Puhoi sits near the very start of it, holding the first image of the thing everything else would eventually answer to. Whether the writers knew all of this when they made Puhoi is a question the facts here do not settle, and I will not pretend to settle it. What can be said is what the finished show contains, and the finished show contains a Season 5 episode in which the future antagonist appears first, in passing, inside a dream that its own hero is not allowed to keep. That is either extraordinary foresight or extraordinary luck, turned into foresight by everything built afterward, and from where a viewer sits at the end, the difference hardly matters. The image is there, the seed is there, the forgetting is there. That last part is the piece I keep returning to. It would be a smaller episode if Finn simply saw the creature and came home. What makes Puhoi haunting is that the seeing and the forgetting happen together, that the show gives its hero a glimpse of the end and then, in the same breath, takes the glimpse away. He carries none of it forward. He does not know what he passed through, and so the burden of remembering falls entirely on the audience, on the people watching closely enough, years later, to look back at a boy falling through a couch and recognize what was waiting on the other side of the dream. The episode altered Finn's memories by erasing them. It is left to us to hold what he could not. Consider first the sheer scale of what we are talking about. By the raw count of episodes, Adventure Time is the second largest thing Cartoon Network ever produced, surpassed only by the Ben 10 franchise. When a body of work grows that large, something happens that is almost never discussed openly. Not every episode can be remembered. There is not enough attention in the world to hold 283 half-hour stories in equal regard. The rerun hours run out, and so does the space in any fan's memory. And so a sorting happens. Some episodes rise and stay lit, and some sink quietly into the deep catalog, and the question worth sitting with tonight is not whether this happens, because it plainly does, but why, and whether the pattern can be measured rather than merely felt. We can begin with the ratings that ordinary viewers leave behind, because those numbers tell a story that runs against a common assumption. You might expect that the episodes people love most would be the ones built around Finn and Jake, the two heroes whose adventures the show is named for. The data does not support that. Look at Simon and Marcy, the 14th episode of Season 5, which sets Finn and Jake aside almost entirely, and instead follows Ice King and Marceline through the wreckage of the years after the Great War, back when he was still a man named Simon, slowly losing himself. On the Internet Movie Database, it carries a 9.7 out of 10, which places it among the very highest scored episodes in the entire series. Now hold that beside I Remember You, the 25th episode of Season 4, a two-hander that also belongs to Ice King and Marceline, with Finn and Jake absent from the plot. It too sits at 9.7. Two of the most beloved episodes the series ever made are episodes in which its title characters barely appear. Consider what that means for the idea of burial. These are not obscure episodes in the sense of being forgotten. They are treasured, but they are also, structurally, exceptions to the format it was supposedly built on. They are the episodes a casual viewer, flipping past a rerun expecting a Finn and Jake romp, might not even recognize as the same program. The very quality that makes them extraordinary, their willingness to leave the heroes behind and follow the sad backstory of a side character, is also the quality that makes them harder to slot into a syndication rotation designed around a formula. Excellence and marginality can live in the same episode at the same time. The pattern does not stop at those two peaks. Sky Witch, the 29th episode of Season 5, follows Marceline and Princess Bubblegum as they set out to recover Marceline's lost childhood toy, a small stuffed creature named Hambo, with no Finn or Jake-driven plotline anywhere in it. It sits at 8.2, lower than the two great two-handers, but still comfortably strong, still an episode that its viewers rated well above the middle. Here again is a story that turns entirely on the interior lives of the series' women, on memory and loss and a friendship with a complicated history. And here again is an episode that a rerun scheduler could easily skip without a single confused phone call, because nothing in it advances the adventure the channel promoted. Not every deep catalog episode is a hidden jewel, of course, and honesty requires that we look at the other end of the scale too. Chips and Ice Cream, the 34th episode of Season 6, centers on BMO, the little living game console, who invites a lonely puppeteer back to the treehouse. On the Internet Movie Database, it scores 6.5, which places it among the lowest scored episodes of the whole series. This matters for our understanding of Burial, because it tells us the sorting is not simply cruel or arbitrary. Sometimes an episode sinks because viewers genuinely found less in it. The deep catalog holds more than misunderstood masterpieces. It is a mixed place, holding both the 9.7s that fans defend and the 6.5s that even devoted audiences rate near the bottom, and any honest account of the pattern has to make room for both. The Internet Movie Database even hosts a user-curated list titled The Worst Adventure Time Episodes, which ranks 23 of them from the lowest rating upward. Whatever you make of such a list, its existence is itself a small piece of evidence. A fandom large enough and engaged enough to systematically rank its own least favorite episodes is a fandom that has developed strong internal consensus about a hierarchy. The episodes at the bottom of that list are, in a real sense, buried by the audience's own hand, cataloged and sorted and set apart, not by a broadcaster but by the viewers themselves. Now leave the fan ratings behind and turn to the harder, colder numbers of broadcast viewership, because those tell a different, and in some ways more revealing story. The single highest viewership episode of the entire series was Burning Low from Season 4, which drew 3.504 million United States viewers when it first aired on the 30th of July 2012. That is the peak. That is the summer when the largest audience the show would ever gather sat down together to watch. Set that number in your mind, because everything after it is a descent. When the series finale, Come Along With Me, aired on the 3rd of September 2018, it drew 921,000 United States viewers and a rating of 0.25 among adults 18 to 49. The program ended in front of roughly a quarter of the audience it commanded at its height. The finale was not a failure. It was simply airing into a world that had moved on, 6 years past the summer peak, and the raw numbers make that migration impossible to miss. But viewership numbers require care, because a low number does not always mean a low-quality episode or even a small underlying audience. Sometimes it means something far more mundane. A longtime tracker of Adventure Time's ratings identified Ghostfly, the 17th episode of Season 6, and Dentist, the 21st episode of that same season, as the two lowest-rated broadcasts of the entire season. And the explanation offered was not that these episodes were bad. It was that both aired at unusual times, on unusual days, when the audience simply was not there to find them. Look closely at Dentist. It aired on the 28th of November, 2014, which was the day after Thanksgiving, one of the most distracted television days of the American calendar, and it drew 1.4 million viewers. The episode did not sink because of what was in it. It sank because of when it was placed. Here is Burial in its purest, most accidental form, an episode buried not by its own weakness, but by a scheduling decision, a slot on a holiday weekend that guaranteed fewer eyes regardless of the story being told. This distinction is the heart of what this chapter is trying to establish. When we say an episode was buried, we are often collapsing several very different causes into a single word. An episode can be buried because audiences rated it low. An episode can be buried because it left the heroes behind and did not fit the format. And an episode can be buried simply because it aired on the wrong day at the wrong hour, invisible through no fault of its own. The numbers let us tell these causes apart, which opinion alone never could. The serialized miniseries offer another angle on the same question, and they complicate the easy story that non-Finn and Jake material was always the neglected material. Consider the 2015 event known as Stakes, an 8-part serialized story about Marceline's origin as a vampire, a piece of pure mythology that put a side character at its absolute center. Far from buried, it was a rating success that topped its time period among the key kids and boys demographics the network cared about most. When the show committed fully to serialized backstory and promoted it as an event, the audience came. Compare that with the 2017 miniseries called Islands, which sent Finn and Jake on a serialized search for Finn's mother, a myth arc built around the series' own hero. It drew between 1 and 1.2 million total viewers per half-hour block, with the premiere on the 30th of January, 2017, pulling just under 1.2 million viewers and a rating of 0.33 in that same adult age bracket. Respectable numbers, but a long way down from that 3.5 million summer peak of 2012. The hero's own myth arc, 5 years later, drew a third of the crowd that a single mid-run episode once did. What this tells us is that the timing of an episode within the life of the whole series mattered as much as its content. Stakes succeeded not only because it was good, but because it arrived while the audience was still large and still gathered. Islands arrived into the long decline, when the broadcast audience had already thinned, and no amount of hero focus or serialized ambition could summon back the viewers who had drifted away. Burial, in this light, is partly a matter of when you were born into the run. An episode airing in 2012 was born into abundance. An episode airing in 2017 or 2018 was born into scarcity, and it carried that scarcity as a permanent mark on its numbers. The clearest single piece of evidence for deliberate structural burial comes from what happened after Adventure Time ended, when the reruns began. In February of 2019, the network Adult Swim started airing Adventure Time reruns, and the way it handled the earliest seasons is remarkable. It intentionally skipped a large number of episodes from seasons 1 and 2, condensing both of those seasons into a rerun block of roughly 5 hours rather than airing them in full. 2 entire seasons, compressed, with a great many episodes simply left out. And then something changed. Once the rollout reached season 3, beginning on the 11th of February 2019, it stopped skipping. From season 3 onward, the episodes aired in full. Sit with that decision, because it is the pattern we have been circling, made concrete by a broadcaster's own hand. Someone looked at seasons 1 and 2, the era of one-off gag episodes, of 11-minute stories that stood alone and told a joke and ended, and decided that many of those episodes were skippable. And that same someone looked at season 3, the point at which the show's tone became more consistently plot-driven rather than a string of self-contained gags, and decided that from there the episodes were worth airing in full. The line the network drew was not random. It fell exactly where its storytelling changed from episodic to serialized, and it tells us that the early one-off episodes were the first casualties of the rerun era, buried not by fans and not by scheduling accident, but by a deliberate editorial judgment about what was worth a viewer's time. The final layer of evidence lives on the internet, in the fan wiki, and it shows that burial continues long after the last broadcast. The Adventure Time wiki on fandom has hosted 4,471 articles since it was founded in May of 2009. That is an enormous, meticulous archive, a page for very nearly everything the show ever contained. And yet the wiki's own listing of its trending pages, the pages drawing the heaviest current traffic, is dominated not by the classic episodes at all, but by franchise-wide and spin-off entries. The pages for Adventure Time Fiona and Cake, for Adventure Time Heyo Bimo, for Adventure Time side quests, and for the main Adventure Time hub itself. The traffic clusters around the new releases and the broad landing pages, not around the deep catalog of individual episodes from the original run. Think about what that reveals. Even among the most dedicated fans, the ones who build and maintain a 4,000-page encyclopedia, present attention flows toward whatever is newest, and toward the general rather than the specific. The page for a particular buried episode from Season 5 sits in that archive, complete and carefully written, and almost no one visits it. The knowledge is preserved, the attention is not, and that is perhaps the quietest and most permanent form of burial of all. An episode that has not been deleted or skipped or forgotten in any dramatic way, but simply exists in a vast catalog that the living current of attention has flowed past, on its way to something newer, leaving the old episode intact and lit and waiting, in the deep, for anyone who cares to go looking. By the time Gumbaldia arrived, the audience had mostly stopped watching in the way it once did. This is the 12th episode of the 10th season, the 278th episode of the run, and it went out on the 18th of March 2018. It sits in a strange and quiet position. It is the direct, penultimate episode of the original run, the last thing before the finale, Come Along With Me, and it carries a story credit shared by Adam Muto, Kent Osborne, Jack Pendarvis, and Julia Pott. 4 writers on the second-to-last chapter of a decade-long show, and yet the fandom's great attention had already drifted elsewhere, toward the edges of the mythology, toward the spin-offs and the lore threads that felt more collectible than a straightforward march to war. What got lost in that drift was one of its clearest pieces of political writing. Consider what actually happens here. Princess Bubblegum conducts a covert reconnaissance mission into her uncle Gumbald's city-state of Gumbaldia. She goes in unseen, and she comes back with confirmation of the thing she suspected, which is that Gumbald is secretly building up an army. That is the reconnaissance. That is the spy work. And the episode frames it importantly as her mission, her intelligence operation, her decision to slip across a border and count the soldiers of a neighboring power. Bubblegum has always been the ruler who watches, who plans, who prepares in advance for the disaster she has decided is coming. Here that instinct is given a shape you can name. She is a head of state, gathering evidence to justify a war she already half expects to fight. While she does this, Finn and Jake go the other way. They travel to Gumbaldia as ambassadors of the Candy Kingdom, and the word ambassador is doing real work in this episode. They are not going in as heroes to punch a villain. They are going in as diplomats, in a last-ditch attempt to prevent a war, which means the series has reclassified its 2 leads. For most of the series, Finn and Jake are the sword and the shapeshifter, the ones who arrive to end a fight. In Gumbaldia, they are sent to stop one before it starts, and that reassignment tells you how the story has grown up around them. The stakes are no longer a monster in a dungeon. The stakes are 2 governments deciding whether their citizens will die. The peace attempt itself is where the episode reveals its sense of humor and its sadness at the same time. Aunt Lolly has a plan. Her plan is to splash Finn and Jake with something called Dum Dum Juice and then have them hug Princess Bubblegum. That is the whole of it, a chemical that dulls the mind, applied to the ambassadors, followed by an embrace, as if reconciliation could be manufactured by force and applied like paint. It does not work. Gumbald states, plainly, that the plan failed. And think about what that failure means inside the logic of this world. Lolly reaches for a shortcut to peace, a way to skip the hard negotiation and simply chemically induce goodwill, and the episode refuses to let it succeed. Peace is not something you can splash onto people. It has to be chosen, and nobody in Gumbaldia is choosing it. So Gumbald reaches for his other option. He declares, in his own words, it's Gum War, and he unveils what he calls his Plan B. The Plan B is a group of assembled villains he names the Legion of Candy Kingdom Haters, and the roster is a kind of dark reunion. It gathers Ricardio and Bandit Princess, Samantha and Peacemaster, Meow and Pete Sassafras, Ash and Sir Slicer, Scorcher and the Green Knight, and, standing among them, a confused Ice King. Every one of these figures is a returning antagonist, someone Finn and Jake or the Candy Kingdom wronged or defeated or angered at some earlier point in the series. Gumbald has done something a careful strategist does. He has looked at 10 seasons of accumulated grievance and organized it. He has taken all the loose resentment the heroes generated over the years and pointed it in a single direction. The presence of the Ice King inside that legion, described as confused, is the detail that keeps the whole thing from becoming a simple parade of bad guys. Here is a character the show spent years teaching us to pity rather than fear, a man who lost his mind and his memory to a cursed crown, and now he stands in an army of haters, apparently not certain why he is there. That confusion is the humane thread running through Gumbald's cold arithmetic. Not everyone in the Legion of Candy Kingdom Haters actually hates. Some of them are simply swept up, gathered into a war machine, assembled by someone with a plan, and the episode lets you feel the difference between the ones who chose this and the one who merely wandered into it. But the sharpest thing in Gumbaldia, the thing that makes it worth staying awake for even as the rest of the fandom looked away, is the way Gumbald justifies himself. He claims that Princess Bubblegum forced his hand. He says, in effect, that his militarization is not aggression but defense, that he is only building an army because she built one first, that the build-up on his side is a response to the build-up on hers. And the episode has already shown you Bubblegum doing exactly this from the other direction. Her reconnaissance, her preparations, her certainty that Gumbold is a threat she must arm against, all of it rests on the same defensive rhetoric. Each of them looks across the border, sees the other side arming, and uses that sight to justify arming further. Each believes the war is being forced upon them by the other. That mirror is the political commentary the episode buries under its candy-colored surface, and it is a genuinely serious one. This is a portrait of a security dilemma, the old and grim mechanism by which two powers, each acting to make itself safer, make war more likely by the very act of preparing for it. Gumbold and Bubblegum are family, uncle and niece, two branches of the same created lineage, and they talk about each other in identical terms of threat and response. Neither of them is presented as simply the villain of the escalation. Bubblegum is not innocent here. Her army is real. Her spying is real. Her willingness to believe the worst is real. What the show does, in its second-to-last episode, is decline to give you a clean side to root for, and instead hand you two rulers who have each talked themselves into a war by calling it defense. And so the events of Gumbaldia do not resolve anything. They light the fuse. This is the episode that directly kicks off the Great Gum War, the central conflict that the finale, Come Along With Me, will have to resolve. Everything the finale spends its runtime trying to stop begins here, in this penultimate chapter, with a failed hug and a declaration of war and a legion of the resentful assembled under a banner of grievance. The war does not arrive from outside the story as some cosmic threat. It grows out of the ordinary machinery of statecraft, out of spying and arming, and the language leaders use to make their own aggression sound like caution. There is a real irony in how little this landed at the time. The show was ending, the audience's eyes had moved to the iceberg of obscure lore and the questions at the margins, and one of the most pointed things Adventure Time ever said about power and war went out in the quiet slot before the finale, half noticed. Gumbold gets his war, Bubblegum gets the confirmation she went looking for, and the two of them, uncle and niece, each certain the other started it, walk into a conflict that the series will spend its final chapter trying to talk them out of. If you have ever wondered whether a candy-colored cartoon could hold a clear-eyed picture of how nations lie to themselves on the way to war, Gumbaldia is the episode that quietly and almost unnoticed does exactly that. Here is the closing. What stays with you is not the story, but the quiet underneath it. These are the episodes that never trended, never spawned 1,000 pieces of fan art, never became the thing people quote back to each other years later. They are the ones that sit in the middle of a season and ask a small, patient question about time, or grief, or the slow work of growing into a person you did not plan to become. The show trusts its audience to sit with those questions without resolving them, and that trust is the reason a series aimed at children became something adults return to when they cannot sleep. Hold that for a moment. A land built on ruin, a boy learning that heroism is mostly just showing up, a princess measuring centuries in the length of a single afternoon. The loudest moments were never the point. The point was always the space between them, the long dissolve into a purple sky, the sound of wind moving over a grass field that goes on further than the frame can hold. And so the episodes fans do not talk about turn out to be the ones that were listening most closely all along. They wait in the archive, unhurried, for whoever is ready to find them. Somewhere out past the edge of the map, the light is going soft and gold, and Finn and Jake are walking home, smaller and smaller, until the field simply keeps going without them. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.